So good morning, and thank you for taking a moment out of your day to view this presentation. My name is Steven Spedowfski. I am the city manager here in San Ramon, and joining me today in the background is Scott Cole, our deputy city manager, and Simone Finney, our communications and community outreach analyst. And today we would like to present an overview of the City of San Ramon's financial outlook and funding needs. I have categorized this presentation as a story that we haven't really told in this context before in San Ramon. It will show some of our financial challenges and how we've dealt with them in the past. And we will today go over our financial context of the city, the accomplishments that we have been very proud of here in the city, some of the challenges that we're facing, community priorities that we have heard from the community throughout this outreach process, some of the options to address our financial situation, and then we'll open it up to any feedback or questions you may have. Now, the financial overview of the city. First, I'd like to highlight that we have over 40 funds that we use to fund the city, and all the funds are unique in nature and tied to specific programs and services. The one fund, though, that is most important to the city is the general fund. And this year, the general fund budget is at $71 million. And one of the reasons why it is the most important fund is it can be used for anything that the city council authorizes. It's the majority of our flexible spending in the city. In terms of staffing, the current budget includes 290-ish full-time equivalent positions. So that's 290 full-time employees. And we have an average vacancy rate of 8%. Our reserves are healthy. We do have a 36% reserve level for the city, and the council sets the policy based on the general fund expenses every year. So for this fiscal year, our general fund is at $19.9 million for the general fund reserve. That is an account that's meant for any emergencies, if there's a disaster in the city, or any major unanticipated expenditures. That's the fund that is drawn down on to cover those expenditures. Going into our revenues for the city, how we fund services. In the previous slide, I mentioned that our general fund expenditures were at $71 million. Our general fund revenue is at $67.6 million. So that's part of our deficit of revenue versus expenditures. We do realize less revenue than what we are spending for the general fund. The two major contributors to our general fund, our general fund basically, is our property tax at $25 million a year. That's 37% of the general fund, and that is a relatively stable source of revenue. Property tax generally doesn't go up drastically or down. It is a pretty stable source. The other fund that I'd like to highlight is our sales and use tax at $13.3 million, or 20% of the general fund, and that fund is considered volatile. It can go up or down based on the economy or anything else happening like a pandemic. Our current rate is 8.75%. That's what you pay on purchases in San Ramon, and we'll get into that in the next few slides. Comparing our city to others in the area, according to CalCities, which is an organization that represents most, if not all, of the cities in California, we are now a large city. So by comparison, Danville is categorized as small at under 50,000. In the 50 to 75,000 range, we have Dublin and Walnut Creek. And then San Ramon is at 85, 86,000 in population, now categorizing us as a large city along with Livermore and Pleasanton. In Contra Costa County, there are 4 large cities. It's Richmond, Antioch, San Ramon, and Concord. Where does your property tax go? One of the questions that we get when people pay their property tax bills is how much goes to the city. This slide represents a breakdown of the property tax bill. 45 cents of that per dollar that you spend on your property tax bills goes to local schools. 15 cents goes to the fire district, 12 cents to the county, 10 cents of that dollar to the city of San Ramon, 8 cents to other agencies, 7 cents to the community college district, and 3 cents to the parks district. Now that's an average of San Ramon based on average tax rates. We get 10 cents on the dollar. For Doherty Valley, we receive 4 cents on the dollar, and that's due in large part to the settlement agreements that were generated from multiple lawsuits when the development happened. Showing our property tax revenue compared to the cities in the Tri-Valley and also our closest in population in Contra Costa County, Walnut Creek. You can see Pleasanton at the top at 80 million in property tax revenue, followed by Dublin, Livermore, and Walnut Creek in the $55 to $30 million range. And then you have San Ramon there at the bottom of the chart, just above Danville, at the $22 million range in terms of property tax. Regarding sales tax, as I mentioned earlier, our current sales tax rate is 8.75%. That is the county base sales tax rate. 6% of that of the sales tax goes to the state of California. 1.5 is distributed to Contra Costa County, 1% to the city of San Ramon, and then 1/4 cent to a local transportation fund. Now, the 1% for the city of San Ramon, that does exclude the Bishop Ranch tax sharing area. That was another deal with the county with annexing Bishop Ranch into the city of San Ramon. Within the Bishop Ranch area, the county receives half of that 1%. So we only get a 1/2 cent of the sales tax within Bishop Ranch. Comparing our sales tax revenue to the to the cities that I mentioned earlier, you have Livermore at the top at about 40 million, Walnut Creek coming in at 35, Dublin at around 27-ish, Pleasanton at 25, and then you have San Ramon at about 13-14 million in sales tax. The reason why we are lower in sales tax than other cities is they have a strong retail corridor along 580 and 680. Every auto dealership that you see generates about $1 million a year in sales tax for cities, and Livermore is up there for the sales tax, not only with the number of car dealerships that they have a very vibrant outlet mall and a couple of casinos that I'm sure helps. And then you have Walnut Creek with their downtown and their auto dealerships, and same with Pleasanton and Dublin. Comparing our sales tax rate, as I mentioned earlier, we're at the base county rate along with Danville at 8.75. Walnut Creek is the next highest at 10.25. They recently passed a 1/2 cent sales tax measure in their community. And I should note that when a community passes a sales tax measure, 100% of that increase goes to the city. There are no other distributions, as I mentioned in the previous slide. Pleasanton, Dublin, and Livermore are at 10.25% for their sales tax currently. They all have either city-specific taxes or they have county or regional taxes that add to that sales tax rate. Now, I mentioned our general fund earlier, and comparing our adopted general funds, you have Pleasanton at 140 million a year, Livermore at 120, followed by Dublin and Walnut Creek at around 100 million, and then there's our general fund at about 70 million. And it is a bit of comparing apples to oranges. Cities do provide different services. There are different areas that they are funding in their cities. But what this chart illustrates is that when you do have a dip in revenue, the amount of wiggle room that we have in the general fund isn't the same as other cities that might have other options to cover that shortfall. Although we have had limited revenue for sales tax, and we are lower in property tax, we are very proud of the accomplishments that this community has been able to achieve over the years. We have 58 parks. I believe we're planned to have over 60 parks eventually, with 375 acres, including school parks, soccer field, cricket pitches. We've been able to install a high number of park, and I believe we're the highest in the area in terms of acres of park to residents and also our accessibility to those parks. I believe the majority of our residents are within a 5 to 10 minute walk of a park. We were able to create a arts community center, or community arts center at Doherty Station, which opened in summer of 2023, including new studio spaces and art galleries. We were able to fund the Iron Horse Trail overcrossing at Bollinger Canyon Road without going out for a special tax or an ask for the residents. That is currently under construction now and will be open in 2025. One item that we do like to highlight is that we have our pensions are fully funded. The majority of cities in California do not have their pensions fully funded. That is a growing issue in cities, but we were able to achieve fully funding our pensions over the last 10 years or so. We have a plan that will keep them funded. We are very proud of our free community events, including the Art and Wind Festival, summer concerts, culture in the community, and our 40th anniversary light parade. Our roads are in excellent shape. We have 240 miles of streets, curbs, gutter, and sidewalk that are well maintained, with an average pavement condition index of 78%. So if you think of a street as 0 being a dirt road and 100% being a brand new street, we currently have a score of 78, where the Bay Area average is 67. Although I do need to note that that current score is dropping due to our budget shortfalls. We were ranked the 10th safest city in the United States to raise a family, according to SafeWise. We always rank in the top rankings of community surveys that come out, whether it's safest city to raise a family or safest city in general. We are very proud of the safety here and our police services here in town. And speaking of which, we also recently received a grant for a retail theft prevention unit, a $5.7 million grant from the state to enhance our retail theft prevention activities throughout the city. Now, moving on to our balancing act here in the city and how we have navigated rising expenditures with relatively flat revenues. We started in 2008 when the economic downturn hit. We had to cut $3.5 million in our budget due to the Great Recession. In 2010, we froze 32 positions in order to make ends meet, which was a 12% staffing cut. And we had to set $2 million more aside for state diversion. Basically, when the state runs out of money, they look to cities to, sometimes they look to cities to balance their budget. And that year, they took back $2 million in various funding sources from the city and cities across the state to balance the budget. By 2014, we had reduced 20% of our budget, about $19.1 million in reduction in total operating budget in that span from 2008 to 2014, which hasn't been restored. We've maintained a majority of those cuts. In 2020, we did receive $8.1 million in the American Recovery Plan Act funding for COVID-19. So we split that money between 2 years, spent $4 million in 2021 and then $4 million in 2022 to help balance the budget. And recently, we used some of our reserves, and we had better than expected sales tax numbers come in, which bridged a $6 million gap. Our structural budget deficit in chart form here, you can see that in 2021, we had an $8 million structural deficit. In 21-22, it dropped to 6, and then back in 22-23 and 23-24, it went back to the $8 million range. And in this upcoming fiscal year, which we're in the middle of our budget process right now, it jumped to 14 million. We will talk about why it jumped in upcoming slides, but this slide illustrates how we have dealt with that funding shortfall throughout the years. It's either been through an increase in our user fee rates, or the two big purple sections of the bars in the first 2 years shows the ARPA funding that we used. And then you move into 23-24, where you start seeing, actually in 22-23 to 23-24 and 24-25, you see the light blue starting to grow. And that light blue is the reduced departmental budget citywide. So that is a combination of deferred services, canceled events, and or frozen positions. And as the one-time revenues that you see on the chart here start to go away, that light blue area starts to grow. And that's one of the reasons why we started last year in January of 23, we began this outreach effort and a revenue exploration effort, because we knew that budget gap started to grow, that blue section started to grow, and those are services that will affect the resident service reductions that you will see in day-to-day operations around the city. As that blue bar grows, more services are reduced. Now, to explain our $14.1 million shortfall this year, again, the note down at the bottom, this is a working draft. It's subject to the final budget adoption. Numbers may change, but to explain it in one slide, our budget deficit, we did have revenues go up 5%, which is 3.5 million. However, our initial expenditures, our initial budget entries showed an 11% increase of 7.5 million. Then we have a category called transfers to other programs. That's transfers out of the general fund to fund programs like Street Smarts or portions of our landscaping and lighting districts. That was a $1 million transfer. We have an item called the Doherty Valley Fund. That's 6.1 million. That is basically to provide services that out in Doherty Valley, to maintain the services out in Doherty Valley that are equal to the rest of the city. It is police, streets maintenance, landscape maintenance. We have to keep a separate fund for Doherty Valley because of the settlement agreements. But this illustrates some of the revenue shortfall that we have because of that property tax transfer to the county. We have an infrastructure maintenance fund that we entered in at 1.5 million. That is building maintenance. That could be other facility maintenance. We have fences and trees and items that we need to maintain. That's that 1.5 million. And then we had a mid-year budget adjustment of 1.5 million of funding that we thought we had left over from the previous year, but due to the shortfall, we halted the spending there. Now, to illustrate some of the increases, this isn't exactly a one-for-one of 14 million from the other slide. This is just to highlight some of the increases that we have seen in this year's budget. Again, working draft, subject to change. We had a 2.9 million increase in salaries. We had a benefit increase of 2 million. We had an item that we're calling benefit restoration. We had a fund that we were drawing down on to help fund our benefits. That fund we can no longer draw down on, so it had to be restored into this year's budget. We had contract increases of 2.6 million. Our utilities went up by 1.6 million. We now spend $8 million a year on utilities here in San Ramon. That's either streetlights, water for the parks, or any other sewer utility costs throughout the city. And our liability insurance also went up by $1 million. Some of the challenges that we're facing in order to keep providing the high quality of services to the city. include maintenance. In the previous slide, you saw some of the effects of inflation. Inflation affects every household. It also affects all of our city costs. Inflation pressure has driven up the costs of delivering our basic services to the city. Staffing, the cost to recruit and retain staff in a highly competitive labor market continues to increase. We are not immune to labor issues of people finding qualified candidates for positions and providing competitive wages. The city has to deal with that issue just like any other business. Service levels. We're continuing to increase our service levels, but they are also outpacing our staffing levels. We are very much a yes city staff. Whenever anybody comes up with a new idea or we implement a new program or service, we always try to find ways to maintain and implement those services, but we are at a point right now without adding additional staff. We are running out of the ability to increase and maintain our current service levels. And then as I mentioned before, outside forces, recessions, insurance costs going up, utilities costs going up, revenue volatility, and retirement costs are all adding to the challenges that we are having as a city. We've conducted significant community outreach. We issued a voter survey in the fall, and we've also sent out to every resident a mail-in survey, and also we've had a survey online now for several months. And the top community priorities that are coming out of that survey are our parks and open space, public safety, and our streets and medians. And more recently, with our mail-in cards and our online survey, public safety is really rising to the top as a high priority for the residents in our community. So we do thank you for that feedback. Again, communications@sanramon.ca.gov. If you'd like to email and provide us any other feedback, we would appreciate it. The surveys and the information that we receive play a part in the budget process that we're going through right now. We share the results with the council, and that's how we prioritize items when we are going through our budget. So thank you very much for the community survey results, and please continue to provide feedback whenever you can. So the options that we have to address the funding needs is we can either go through additional budget cuts like we are doing now, where the council on an annual basis will consider what operating levels and service levels that can be reduced due to the income that we currently have. And that results in a decrease in services and due to our flat revenue and an increase in cost of services. Or we can look at a revenue measure where the council could consider placing a tax measure on the ballot. If we receive a revenue measure, that means that we can preserve existing services and look to fund new services as our future funding levels allow. If the council were to decide to go for a revenue measure, our current base rate is 8.75%. At a half-cent sales tax measure, that would generate $7.8 million a year. 3/4 cent sales tax would generate $11.7 million a year, and 1 cent would be $15.7 million per year. And where we're at in the process now, as I mentioned earlier, in January of 23, we began the process. We engaged a consultant to guide us through the process of receiving community feedback and developing the data and gathering the data that we would need to present to the council so they can make an informed decision. We anticipate that item will be before the council in June, no later than July of this year, to make a decision as to whether or not we would go for a sales tax measure. If the council decides to go for a sales tax measure, that would be placed on the November ballot. We have looked at other options. We have looked at business license taxes and hotel taxes. Any other potential tax increase doesn't move the needle as much as a sales tax and wouldn't make a meaningful difference in our budget. So this is the item that we've been focusing on for the last year. So as I mentioned before, your feedback matters. No decisions have been made. The community listening is ongoing. We will report back on more on the surveys in May. We have an additional survey going out, and we will have council presentations in June or July of 2024. We've conducted 3 community surveys. We're holding in-person outreach events. Please, if you know of a group that we can present to, or somebody that would like a virtual presentation, feel free to email us and we will make sure to schedule out events. And we are listening. We want to know your thoughts. What do you think? What are your priorities? What are your questions? What do you need to know? And at this point, I thank you for tuning in this morning to the presentation. Again, we will be making sure that this is posted on YouTube. We will send out the link to the community so they can watch this presentation. We have questions coming in. I know there are some on Zoom and some previous, so I'd like to take a moment right now to answer some of those questions that we received. And the first one is, what is the timeline for this process? What cuts have been decided so far? What is the city's fiscal year, and when will the final budget be decided? I mentioned the timeline for the process. It's here on the slide. That June or July is when we will be, when the council will be making a decision. What cuts have been decided so far? We are in the middle of our budget process. If I had to summarize some of the cuts, we've deferred a lot of maintenance, vehicle maintenance, computer replacements. We're deferring maintenance on some of our streets and tree maintenance. We have frozen positions. Immediately when we knew that we had this level of a shortfall, we froze 13 to 14 positions. I anticipate that we will, with this next fiscal year budget, have somewhere around 20 positions frozen. And that includes maintenance, office staff, police positions. Specifically in police, it's positions like a traffic officer, a police lieutenant, community crime prevention officers. We are not freezing any patrol positions, so those will remain fully staffed for patrol. But that's about the, it gives you a little bit of a flavor for the 20 positions. And we've also canceled events. We will have fewer summer concerts. We canceled our tree lighting event. We canceled the light parade. Any event that we could look at and reduce, we have proposed to the city council in this budget. There's also, what is the city's fiscal year? Our fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. And when will the final budget be decided? Right now, we are on track to have a second budget hearing for the council on May 28th. You can show up, email us ahead. You can comment on the budget process at that meeting, and we are anticipating that we will have our budget adopted on June 11th. Going on to the next question, what are the plans for a revenue enhancement measure? Again, I've gone through that. It looks like June or July for the decision, and then it would be on the November 2024 ballot. It has to go on a primary ballot by law if you're going for a tax. So we are scheduled, if the council makes that decision, November 2024. I have what budget cuts are being proposed. I highlighted the 3, but what the 3 areas, general areas where we're cutting budgets. But going back to that other slide, the one with the blue bar, that's about an $8 million cut to the proposed budget. So out of that $14 million shortfall, that's around $8 million for each department. That's roughly 10%. We asked each department to come up with a cut list of around 10%. And that's roughly what we need to make the balance, the budget balance this year. How can residents most effectively converse with their respective district council members regarding these changes? I would go to the city website. On the homepage, there is a city council section. You can find each council member's email and phone number if you would like to contact them. We also have a website. If you go, I think if you search district elections or districts, you can look up what district you are in if you want to contact your specific district representative. But I know they're happy to take phone calls from anybody within the city. So please feel free to contact them. You can reach me through that communications website, or you can call as well on the city manager's number. Won't all the development in the city provide enough revenue to make up for the shortfall? Potentially, yes, eventually. However, development, the revenue coming in from development is relatively slow. It takes 5+ years away before we see any significant spike in that revenue chart. That's why, and I'll just go back to it. Going back to the property tax slide, you could see that it's relatively flat. So as new developments come in, we do receive that, but that's only after they've been built, the foundations have been poured, and the tax revenue starts coming in. We do have a system set up where we do analyze the property tax coming in for the developments versus what services cost. And if it shows that it's not enough property tax with new development to pay for the services, there is a district that has been set up where those properties pay an additional fee on their property tax to make up for that. Yeah, let's see here. I do have another question here. One that we do get frequently: why didn't the city address this fiscal deficit earlier? And I could say, first, many cities do go through deficits like this throughout their span, for lack of a better term. We haven't gone through a fiscal deficit like this in a long time. However, in 2017, we did conduct outreach. We conducted outreach to the community about the need for additional revenue. And we do have a very conservative community when it comes to sales tax or any tax measure. Whenever there's a countywide measure, usually San Ramon and Danville are on the lower end, so we are very sensitive to that. Also in 2019, we released a survey, and it did not come back positive for increasing revenues, but we were able to manage the deficit. And when COVID hit, it did throw our budget off slightly in terms of what our expenditures were, the revenues, and the ARPA money made up for that. After COVID, that $7 to $8 million deficit range, we did have sources. I had the chart earlier that showed the one-time uses of revenue and other sources that we can pull from. However, over the last few years, those sources have dried up. And we did start preparing for this back in January of 23. So we've been in this process for about 1.5 years. We also spent about 9-10 months of working on our fee study for the city to make sure our fees were set correctly. So we've been working on it. I believe that, at least recently, we've been very responsive in doing everything that we can to address this and provide options to the community for funding the city. If the community decides that a tax measure is not palatable, then we will look at other ways to raise revenues, and we will live within the means of whatever that general fund revenue comes in. That's what we will look to provide services to the city. I am checking our email. I do see we have quite a number here. If I haven't answered them already, I'll go through the Zoom. Is the city lot part of Bishop Ranch only providing a 0.5 cent sales tax instead of 1% like other retail in San Ramon? Yes, the city center is part of that district. When the city approached the county to annex Bishop Ranch into the city, at one point it wasn't in the city. Part of the deal was the agreement was that they would annex it into the city, but there would be a zone drawn over Bishop Ranch that half of the sales tax would go to the county. So the city center is in that portion. And I would like to reiterate, if the city passes our own city-specific sales tax measure, that agreement does not apply to it. 100% of that revenue would come to the city. So there's a long question. Thank you for writing this about a U.S. News article, San Ramon being one of the wealthiest cities, based on household median income. That would indicate that there are higher disposable income levels here. Wondering what's the city doing to attract and retain retail businesses and boost the level of sales tax? It appears that replacing retail with housing is the theme of late with the city. Now, yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and I'll try to answer this as quickly as I can, and get to the remaining few questions that we have. The retail has been a challenge in San Ramon. If I had our retail map here, you would see that we have very few retail sites compared to other cities. The whole 580 or 580, 680 corridor, but in our case, the 680 corridor, we don't have a lot of corridor-facing retail space, and that's what's needed to attract some of the larger tax-generating uses like car dealerships or other items that would generate revenue. We do work closely with our Chamber of Commerce to attract and retain businesses here in the city. Our current vacancy rate is around 8 or 9%. At one point, it was at 3%. So we do have a lot of businesses here, and we do our best to retain the businesses. Now, whether or not they're sales tax generating businesses is a whole other item to cover. But we are maintaining as much of the retail businesses that we can here in the city. At one point, we did, with our housing requirements from the state, the only areas that we had to zone for housing, or some of the areas that we had to look at to meet those numbers, were our retail centers, and we had a housing overlay over the retail centers. Recently, in our general plan update, we have pulled back on as much as that as we possibly could to maintain our retail centers. So we are trying to preserve the amount of retail in the city, and we are pulling back as much as we can. Now, the majority of our housing numbers will be met with the development that's occurring in our city core. We have 10,000 units planned over about a 30-year period for the city core. They will be located close to retail. They'll be located close to schools and also job opportunities. So developing our core is where a lot of the housing is going, and we're trying to preserve that retail. In order to make a significant difference in our budget, we would basically need to double our retail space in the city, and we just don't have the land for that. So hopefully that answers that question. Many of these, I think, have been answered, and we will keep the questions here in the, we'll keep the questions, we'll archive them, and we'll try and get back to you if we have contact information. We also have a question: has TOT recovered from pandemic numbers? No. At one point, we received around 4 million in TOT. That's stabilized at about 2 million. Hotels are still struggling. What vote requirement is there for the property tax measure? Simple majority vote. Yes, it is 50+1. So that is 50% plus one more. So you need just a simple majority. I'm reading someone, it sounds like 1% sales tax will yield an additional 15 million. Would that cover the entire 14 million shortfall? Yes, that would cover the current shortfall. Now, I would hope that our future revenue keeps increasing with property tax and sales tax to keep up with expenses. But, a $15 million revenue generation from a 1% sales tax, at least in my practice, that doesn't mean that we instantly restore everything. We are going to need to take a very critical look at our city services. If we receive this additional revenue, be very careful with what we restore. It doesn't mean we suddenly hire staff, all frozen positions, add new staff, looking at adding new city services. We are at a point here in San Ramon where we have to take a critical look at all of our services. And if we are fortunate enough to receive additional revenue, be very careful with how we implement the spending of that revenue. Basically, planning for that being our situation for many years to come, and not just instantly spending everything just because the revenue is coming in. We had more questions regarding businesses. Again, we are working with the Chamber of Commerce. We are working with Bishop Ranch and an entity called Discover San Ramon to continue to promote San Ramon as a great place to do business. We are starting to get, I'm hearing from businesses looking to move in. They are noticing the city center. They're noticing how walkable it is in San Ramon. They are starting to look towards San Ramon to relocate their businesses for that, that lifestyle that it would give their employees, being able to walk to a restaurant or walk to Target on lunch, or, walk around a lake and through Central Park. We're starting to get traction. I know Discover San Ramon is looking at, they are the business tourism improvement district here in San Ramon. They were just renewed for 5 years. They will be focusing on outreach and campaigns to have businesses locate here. I think I'm trying to see, that seems to be covering everybody. Let me check one more. Yes, I think I've covered the chat questions. Again, if I haven't covered your question, please feel free to reach out to us at communications@sanramon.ca.gov. We do have an upcoming meeting. I think that was the last slide. We have another, watch our social channels. We also have our city email and our other communications. We have another presentation open to the community at Doherty Valley Station later on this month. So if we didn't answer your question here, or if we didn't get it in chat, please feel free to email us, show up to one of the community meetings. I thank everybody today for attending, and thank you very much for your input. And again, feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to, I'll stop sharing and stop the presentation. Thank you very much for attending.